$220 million on overtime across 4 public safety agencies last fiscal year, including almost $134 million at MPD alone. A new report from the Office of the D.C. Auditor suggests the city is relying on overtime to cover persistent staffing shortages and high rates of employee leave. So is paying overtime actually cheaper than hiring more people, or are taxpayers footing the bill for a system that needs to be rebuilt? And joining us now is Sepp, a president of the National Taxpayers Union and NTU Foundation. Pete, thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Pete, let's start with this. You know, when taxpayers hear nearly $220 million in overtime, what should concern them most here, the size of the bill or what it reveals about how these agencies are being managed?
I think it is a management problem, and DC isn't alone when confronting these overtime costs. New York, for example, has a great deal of problems with overtime costs and keeping them under control. I was looking at a report that Ulster County in New York was paying some of the top corrections officers $600,000 worth of overtime pay over a 4-year period. New York State employees in the highway department, 8 to 30% of the employee costs are overtime, depending on where they're located. This is a problem of management because governments often don't optimize where they put their personnel, who they need to recruit, and it's especially acute with corrections, police, and other public safety employees.
Okay, so out of the $220 million on overtime, MPD accounted for almost $134 million of that. There's ongoing debate over the causes, justifications for that spending. You know, some feel it to be a necessary cost of policing a city that, of course, regularly we host major events, protests, high security operations, while others feel it's evidence of waste. Can you speak to this and the critical questions being raised about the spending?
It may be necessary in the near term, and the district is somewhat unique in the fact that there are all kinds of public events going on all the time that need special security precautions. But other cities like New York somehow muddle through it. Chicago does it. These are still problems, though, at base of figuring out where you need your employees the most, training up, controlling leave requests, and making innovations in your personnel policies like staggered shifts. You know, the amount of leave being taken in public safety employees in the district, the average, depending on the department, is between 9 and 11 weeks every year. Some of those are absences, probably because there are just not enough people who have the flexibility to work 8-hour shifts day after day at the time that they might be needed most, which is often the wee hours of the morning for cops, for example. What if you had staggered shifts, 4 hours on, 4 hours off? What if you did compensatory time off instead of pay? These are the types of solutions that other governments are using to try and bring their overtime costs under control.
Well, you know, the report does suggest D.C. may need to hire more public safety employees, but from a taxpayer perspective, when does adding permanent salaries and benefits become more cost effective than continuing to pay overtime?
Yeah, there's a midpoint, I think, where if your overtime budgets are in the double-digit increases for at least 5 years, you've got a problem that you need to address through hiring. But you also need to take a look at whether there are inefficiencies in staffing in non-public safety positions so that you can get a little more money to pay the public safety employees and recruit them at a higher rate. You also need to take a look at the retirement impact. You know, pay is the main component, along with years of service, in the pension plans for these employees. And overtime pay allows the pension benefits to get inflated. So hiring more people and not having to pay them overtime can actually save you money in retirement costs down the line.
This report doesn't make formal recommendations or calculate exactly how much different reforms would save. What additional information, Pete, would you need before concluding that D.C. taxpayers are being overcharged?
We don't need additional information. We need action. We need a reform plan that's going to optimize personnel, emphasize the public safety employees first, start resizing some of these facilities so that you need fewer employees to cover them, do things like shift differentials and figuring out compensatory time off. They are already working elsewhere, so DC needs to act on these right now.
We've got about 30 seconds here, Pete. Real quick, is this primarily a spending problem, a staffing issue, or a management problem, in your opinion?
I would rank it as spending problem, followed by management, followed by staffing. So the first thing to do is figure out, is this a priority? If we need to spend more here, spend less elsewhere. Figure out the management of employees that you have, and then go to more staffing for the areas that need it most.
Okay, Pete Sepp, president of the National Taxpayers Union and NTU Foundation. Thanks so much for your insight and joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you, sir.